viewer left a comment on the previous episode requesting an episode on the placement of nicht in German sentences. This is a good one. I had something else planned for today's episode, but I'm going to shuffle things around. Partially because this is a viewer request, and I love doing viewer request episodes, but mostly because I really like this one. This is a good one. This is something that sounds like it should be simple, but it isn't. It's surprisingly complicated. When we negate a sentence in German, where do we put the word nicht? If we move it around in the sentence, we can change the meaning of the sentence, sometimes in unexpected ways. So we have to be careful with this. So by viewer request, let's look at how we negate sentences in English and German, with a particular emphasis on where do we place that pesky word nicht. Das hier ist nicht lernen und laufen. Das hier ist nicht lernen und gehen. Das hier ist lernen und fahren. Let's start with English. And I know what you're thinking. Well, we know how to negate sentences in English. We just throw the word not in there. But is it as simple as you think it is? Let's take a closer look, because you might be surprised. For example, I'm riding a motorcycle. How would I negate that sentence? Well, okay, we'd say I'm not riding a motorcycle. Okay, but why does the word not negate the helper verb instead of the main verb? What do you mean? We're saying not riding. We're negating the main verb. Are we? Think about it. He is riding a motorcycle. How do we negate that? We say he isn't riding a motorcycle. Isn't is a contraction of is not. Not is negating is, the helper verb, not the main verb riding. Another example, a simple sentence, I see it. Subject, verb, object, the simplest sentence I can think of. How do we negate that sentence? You might think we should just be able to throw the word not in there. If we're negating the verb to see, we don't need another verb in there, but we kind of do. In English, we would say, I don't see it. Don't is a contraction of do not. We added the word do to that sentence specifically so we could negate it. I do not see it. This is kind of weird, but all of this ising and amming and aring, all of the progressive tenses in English didn't used to exist. This wasn't previously a thing in the English language. In Old English, you could negate a sentence just by throwing the word not into it. So for example, I see it. You could say, I see it not. That sounds very old-fashioned. That sounds like something out of Lord of the Rings. Or depending on your preferred cultural reference, I guess it sounds like something out of Wayne's World. I see it not. Does anybody remember Wayne's World? So, there are other options in English for negating sentences. You don't have to use the word not. You can use the word no. For example, I have money. How do we negate that? Well, we could say, I don't have money. Literally, I do not have money. Okay. There's other options there, though. We could use the word no instead. We could say, I have no money. Okay, there's another option, which is the construct not any. This is sometimes hard to spot because the words not and any don't always show up right next to each other in the sentence. Sometimes they go around, or they bracket, or they surround the verb that they're helping to negate. So for example, I don't have any money. I do not have any money. Not and any surround that verb have. Are these options in English all interchangeable with one another? Well, they can be. They can mean the same thing. So, for example, I don't have money. I have no money. I don't have any money. All three of these could imply, like right now, on me. I don't have any money on me, but if we find a bank machine, I can get some. But you could also use them with the implied word at all. I don't have money at all. I have no money at all. I don't have any money at all. Those are all much stronger. So they can be interchangeable, but not always. Let's look at another example. Let's go back to I'm riding a motorcycle. We negated that earlier by saying I'm not riding a motorcycle. Could we negate that with the word no instead? Well, you can. It sounds a little old-fashioned to my ears, but you could say I ride no motorcycle, or I ride no motorcycles. That sounds kind of old-fashioned to me. Could we use the not any construct here? Yes, you can. You could say I don't ride any motorcycle. That sounds a little clunky. You could pluralize it. I don't ride any motorcycles. That still sounds a little clunky to me. If it's in the plural, you can actually drop the word any out of the sentence because it's kind of implied. You could just say, in English, I don't ride motorcycles. Okay, does that mean the same thing as I'm not riding a motorcycle? No, not at all. It's very different. If I say I'm not riding a motorcycle, present progressive tense, it implies right now. I'm not riding a motorcycle right now, but I do ride from time to time. Whereas if I say I don't ride motorcycles, that's much stronger. It means like ever. I don't ride at all. So in English, not and no and not any can be interchangeable, but not necessarily. They can mean very different things. Now, in English, it's also possible to use stress and intonation to change the meaning of what you're saying. This is not specific to negation, but since we're on the subject, let's look at it specifically in the context of negation. This is very interesting to me, to the point where I think this might be worth an episode on its own. We could just have an episode talking about how stress and intonation can change the meaning of a sentence. Wait, did I do an episode on this? I think maybe I did. If I did an episode on this, I'm going to put it up on screen, and if I've not yet done that, I'm going to edit this part out. So yes, stress and intonation are very interesting, and they can change the meaning of a sentence. Specifically, in the context of negation, it can change which part of the sentence is being negated. Let's look at intonation first. Let's take a simple statement. I'm not buying this motorcycle today. Okay, if you were really paying attention there, you might have noticed a slight downward intonation on the last word in the sentence. I'm going to say it again. I'm not buying this motorcycle today. Today is at a lower intonation than the rest of the sentence. Why? That's how in English we imply a period at the end of the statement. I'm done speaking. That's it. I'm not stressing anything. I'm not emphasizing any particular part of the sentence, but I am done speaking. That was a complete statement. And we can tell that by that slight downward intonation. We can invert that intonation. We can put an upward rising intonation at the end of the sentence. We can say, I'm not buying this motorcycle today? That turns it into a question, almost like a statement of disbelief. Like, what do you mean? Of course, we talked about this. Of course I'm going to buy today. I can't believe what I'm hearing, and so I turn it into a question. If you want to be explicit to turn that statement into a question, you can flip the order of the subject and the verb at the beginning of the sentence. You can say, am I not buying this motorcycle today? That explicitly makes it a question because, what's up, my friend? Because because we're starting the sentence with a verb. Let's talk about stress, because this is where it gets really interesting. Without adding any words to the sentence, and without removing any words from the sentence, and without rearranging words within the sentence, we can completely change the meaning, or more specifically, we can change which part of the sentence is being negated here. This is very interesting. So let's look at some examples. The default neutral statement was, I'm not buying this motorcycle today. Okay, great. What happens if we start stressing stuff? Let's try it out. I'm not buying this motorcycle today. What happened there? It kind of implies that I'm not done speaking yet. It sounds like there's more to that sentence. There's an implied ... but at the end of that sentence. I'm not buying this motorcycle today ... but I am going to come back tomorrow and buy it. Or what if I say, I'm not buying this motorcycle today? If I stress this motorcycle, it implies that that's the part of the sentence being negated. I'm not going to buy this motorcycle today ... but I am going to buy that one over there. It looks really fast. I can stress the verb. I can say, I'm not buying this motorcycle today. It implies ... but I am going to rent it, or borrow it, or steal it. Don't steal motorcycles. I shouldn't use examples like that. I'm not going to buy the motorcycle today, but I am going to rent it. I can stress the word not. I can say, I am not going to buy this motorcycle today. It strengthens it greatly. It means that it's absolutely not going to happen. I'm emphasizing the entire negation there. I can even emphasize the subject there. I can say, I'm not going to buy this motorcycle today, but it implies ... but somebody else might. So, take a look at those sentences. They all have the same words in the same order, but they all mean slightly different things. All we changed there was which word we're stressing, and it affects what the word not specifically refers to, which is pretty neat. Is there anything like that in the German language? Oh man, I'm glad you asked, because there certainly is. Let's take a look at German. Let's go back to basics and work our way up. Let's take a look at a simple sentence in German. Ich sehe es. I see it. Okay, subject, verb, object. Word for word from English, no problem. How would we negate that in German? If we followed the example set by English, we would have to add a word do to the sentence just to negate that word. This is horrible, horrible German. Please don't speak like this. This is for illustrative purposes only. If we tried to phrase it in German the way we phrase it in English, it would be Ich tue nicht sehe es. Man, that hurt my brain just saying it. Yeah, that's bad German. So in German, we don't have to follow the example set by English. In German, in fact, they phrase it the same way that we used to phrase it in Old English. They say, Ich sehe es nicht. Literally, I see it not. That sounds very old-fashioned in modern English, but that's how they still say it in German. Great. So this brings us to the first rule. There's two rules we're going to go over today. The first rule for placement of nicht in German sentences, and I use the word rule very loosely here because there's many exceptions which we're going to cover in this episode. But the first rule is this. By default, in simple declarative statements anyway, nicht wants to go at the end of the sentence. There's a ton of examples of this. If your sentence is very simple, nicht will probably go at the end when you negate it. Ich sehe es nicht. Ich verstehe das nicht. Ich will es nicht. Ich bereue es nicht. Ich vermisse sie nicht. Etc., etc., etc. Nicht goes at the end. This is very Lord of the Rings. I see it not. I understand it not. I fear it not, etc., etc. Okay. If that was it, we could end the episode here and it would be an extremely short episode. Unfortunately, it's never that easy, right? Let's keep going. There's exceptions to this rule, quite a lot of them. Let's look at them in no particular order. Let's look at the exceptions to this rule of nicht going at the end. Okay, the first one we'll look at is separable verb prefixes. If you're negating a sentence with a separable verb, nicht will go before the prefix. Remember, when you use a separable verb, the prefix detaches and gets thrown to the end of the sentence clause. So depart, for example, is abfahren. It's separable. So if you say we are departing, it's wir fahren ab. If that's confusing to you, I refer you back to episode 7 because we spent an entire episode discussing separable verb prefixes. I'm not going to go over that again here. I'm going to assume that that's understood. If that confuses you, hit the pause button, go back and watch episode 7 and come back. This will make more sense. So we're departing is wir fahren ab. How do we negate that? Nicht wants to go at the end, so you might think, okay, wir fahren ab nicht. Nope. When the separable prefix gets thrown to the end, it gets thrown right to the end. Past nicht. So we say, wir fahren nicht ab. We're not departing. Okay. Something similar happens in the next exception that we'll look at, and that is when you're using a modal verb or a helper verb to modify the main verb. Remember from previous episodes that when you do this, the main verb gets pushed to the end of the sentence clause and reconjugated back to the full infinitive. So I see it, ich sehe es, word for word, no problems. But when we add a modal verb, let's say I can see it, in German, can pushes sehen to the end of the sentence clause and reconjugates it back to the full infinitive. Ich kann es sehen. Literally, I can it see. That's not how we say it in English. If this is confusing to you, then I refer you to episode 8. That whole episode was about the word order changes that can happen in German language sentences. I'm not going to go over that again here. I'm going to assume that's understood. If that's confusing to you, hit the pause button, go watch episode 8 and come back and this will make more sense. So, how would we negate ich kann es sehen? Nicht wants to go at the end, so you think, okay, ich kann es sehen nicht. Nope. When the verb gets pushed to the end, it gets pushed right to the end, past nicht. So we say, ich kann es nicht sehen. Literally, I can it not see, but don't worry so much about the literal translation. 3 more exceptions that we're going to go through rapid fire. If you're negating a sentence with an adjective, if you're negating a sentence with a preposition, or if you're negating a sentence with an adverb, nicht will tend to want to go before those elements. Let's look at each one with examples. Let's look at an adjective. Es schmeckt gut. It tastes good. Okay, how would you negate that? Nicht wants to go at the end, so es schmeckt gut nicht. Nope. There's an adjective there, so nicht wants to go before it, so we say es schmeckt nicht gut. Okay, what if we modify the adjective? What if we say it tastes especially good, or it tastes really good? Es schmeckt besonders gut, or es schmeckt sehr gut. If we're modifying the adjective, then nicht will go before the start of the chain. So for example, es schmeckt nicht besonders gut, or es schmeckt nicht sehr gut. It doesn't taste particularly good, it doesn't taste very good. Okay. Let's look at prepositions. If you're negating a sentence with a preposition, nicht will want to go before the preposition. So, dieses Geschenk ist für mich. This gift is for me. Okay. How would we negate that? Nicht wants to go at the end, so dieses Geschenk ist für mich nicht. Nope, there's a preposition there, so nicht wants to go before it. Dieses Geschenk ist nicht für mich. Let's pause there and look at that sentence. That is word for word how we would say it in English. Exactly the same word order. This gift is not for me. Dieses Geschenk ist nicht für mich. Great. Sometimes English and German line up perfectly in terms of word order, and that's kind of nice. And finally, let's look at adverbs. If you use an adverb in a sentence with a negation, the word nicht wants to go before the adverb usually. So for example, ich fahre schnell. I drive fast. If you want to negate that, is it ich fahre schnell nicht? Nope, because there's an adverb. Nicht wants to go before the adverb. So we say ich fahre nicht schnell. I don't drive fast. Okay. What if we modify the adverb? What if I say ich fahre wirklich schnell? I drive really fast. Again, similar with adjectives, when you negate that, nicht goes before the start of the chain, so ich fahre nicht wirklich schnell. I don't drive really fast. Okay. The exception to this is adverbs of time. For whatever reason, the word nicht wants to come after them instead of before them. This is annoying. This is an exception within an exception, which is really annoying. But it is what it is. So, for example, I'm not coming today would be ich komme heute nicht. You wouldn't say ich komme nicht heute. Actually, you could say that. That is a valid German sentence, but it changes the meaning of it. We're getting ahead of ourselves here. All of the examples in this section are showing nicht in the default position. What I mean by that is we're not stressing anything, we're not emphasizing anything, we're just negating the entire the entire sentence. So let's put a pin in this one and come back to it later. The default position here is ich komme heute nicht, I'm not coming today. But we will revisit this one later in this episode. Okay, I know that's a lot of exceptions. I'll take a brief sidetrack here to mention that in my experience learning the German language these last few years, I find that the German language usually is pretty consistent. It's pretty good about consistency. It lays out the rules, and yeah, there's a few exceptions here and there that you just have to memorize. Every language has exceptions. It's just how it is. But usually German's not bad with exceptions. This is one of the rare cases where you look at it and you see all of the exceptions to this rule and you think, well, how am I supposed to learn this? If you're new to German and you're coming across this early on in your studies, don't get too discouraged because it's not usually this bad. Okay, end of rant. Let's take a step back from nicht and look at another option in German. Just like in English, we can use the word not, or we can use the word no, or we can use the construct not any. In German, we have another option that we can use here instead of nicht. It is the word kein. Kein is more equivalent to, in English, when you would use the word no, or sometimes when you would use the construct not any. Instead of reaching for nicht in German, you would say kein. The general rule here is if you want to negate the verb or the action of the sentence, you use nicht. If you want to negate a noun in the sentence, if the noun is introduced with an indefinite article or without an article, i.e. plural nouns, then you don't reach for nicht. Instead, you use kein. Let's look at an example. Dude, don't drive right in front of me like that. For example, you might say, is that a motorcycle? It is very, very tempting as an English speaker learning German to answer that question with Nein, das ist nicht ein Motorrad, because that's exactly how you would say it in English. That is not a motorcycle. But we're negating a noun here, and it was a noun that was introduced with an indefinite article. Therefore, we don't use nicht here, but rather kein. You say, nein, das ist kein Motorrad. Okay, that's equivalent in English to saying no. That is no motorcycle. That sounds very old-fashioned to me in modern English, but you could say it that way. That is no motorcycle. That's no moon. It's a space station. Sometimes we do this also with the construct not any. So for example, do you see any motorcycles? No, I don't see any motorcycles. In German, you could say, nein, ich sehe keine Motorräder. Keine. Kein became keine there. Why? Kein undergoes declension, just like possessive articles and just like adjectives. If you need a refresher on the word endings that we use across different cases in German, then I refer you back to episodes 3, 4, 5, 6 that we did last year on German case. I think every single one of those episodes listed example adjectival word endings for their respective case, so I'm not going to go over that again in this episode. So the plural of kein in the nominative and accusative cases is keine. Ich sehe keine Motorräder. This is equivalent in English to saying, I don't see any motorcycles. Okay. You'll also sometimes hear not one of these. For example, I don't want any of these motorcycles. Ich will keines von dieser Motorräder. Kein became keines und dies became dieser. Again, if this is confusing, I refer you back to episodes 3, 4, 5, 6 when we talked about German case. Now, a quick sidetrack, I will point out that sometimes in German, kein und nicht are interchangeable. Oh, they're tearing down the McDonald's here. Huh. For example, let's say you don't eat fish, and you want to say that. You could say, ich esse nicht Fisch. Nicht is negating the verb here. Eating is the thing that I don't do with fish. Okay, you could also say, ich esse keinen Fisch. Kein becomes keinen in masculine singular accusative case. So, ich esse keinen Fisch, we're negating fish there. Fish is the thing that I don't eat. Okay, but what's the difference there? They mean the same thing, right? So sometimes in German, kein und nicht can be interchangeable, but very often they are not interchangeable. Okay, let's take one more sidetrack before we get it back onto the main track. I will point out that there are some wonky exceptions in German that unfortunately you just have to memorize. These break the rules. There are certain noun-verb combinations in German that go together so frequently they're basically treated like one word. A very common one is Fahrradfahren, to ride a bicycle. If you say, ich kann Fahrrad fahren, I can ride a bicycle. Okay, how would we negate that? Think about the default position of nicht from Rule 1 that we talked about earlier. Nicht wants to go at the very end of the sentence unless a modal verb is pushing the main verb to the end, which is happening here. Kann is pushing fahren to the end. Okay, so then we should say, ich kann Fahrrad nicht fahren, right? You should. That follows the rules that we've outlined so far, but this is a wonky exception because Fahrradfahren is almost treated like a single word, so nicht goes in front of it. Ich kann nicht Fahrrad fahren is how a German person would say that. That's, okay, annoying, but you just kind of have to memorize those special cases when you see them. Okay, back to the main track because this is where the episode gets interesting. Let's talk about intonation and stress. Intonation is handled pretty much exactly how it's handled in English. Our example sentence was, I'm not buying this motorcycle today. Slight downward inflection at the end indicates a period. We're done talking. That's the end of the statement. Great. Same in German. Ich kaufe dieses Motorrad heute nicht. Slight downward inflection at the end, I'm done talking. It's a statement. I'm not stressing anything. I'm not emphasizing anything. I'm just negating the entire sentence. Great. Just like in English, you can reverse that. You can put an upward inflection at the end. Ich kaufe dieses Motorrad heute nicht. It's like a question. It's like a statement of disbelief. Like, was meinst du? Wir haben darüber schon geredet. Natürlich kaufe ich es heute. Was fällt dir eigentlich ein? It's a statement of disbelief because I can't believe what I'm hearing. So I turn it into a question. And just like in English, you can flip the order of the subject and the verb at the beginning of the sentence to explicitly make it a question. Kaufe ich dieses Motorrad heute nicht? It's explicitly a question now because the verb comes first. Okay, so far identical to English, great, but let's talk about stress. Remember how in English we could stress different words in the sentence to mean different things, to negate different things. In German they can do this by moving the word nicht, and this brings us to the second rule that we're going to look at today. If nicht is not in the default position in the sentence, by default position I mean either at the end or following one of the exceptions that we have outlined in this episode. If nicht is not in that default position, then it negates whatever comes directly after it. So, let's try this out. Ich kaufe dieses Motorrad heute nicht. Simple, negative statement, no particular stress or emphasis. What happens when we start to move nicht? Ich kaufe dieses Motorrad nicht heute. What does that mean? That's equivalent in English to when we stressed or overstressed the word today. I'm not buying this motorcycle today. In English, there's an implied ... but at the end of that sentence. In German, if you put nicht in front of heute, it stresses that word. It negates that word. There's an implied ... sondern at the end of that sentence now. Sondern means but rather. Ich kaufe dieses Motorrad nicht heute, ... sondern morgen, but tomorrow I'm going to come back and buy it. And now, we can revisit that sentence example that we saw earlier. Remember, I'm not coming over today. Simple default position of nicht is at the end. Ich komme heute nicht. But you can also say ich komme nicht heute. What does that do to the sentence? It stresses the word heute. If you say that to a German person, they might look at you like, sondern? They're waiting for you to finish the sentence. It sounds like you're not done speaking. And that might not be what you intended. But if you say ich komme nicht heute, it implies ... sondern morgen, for example. But I am coming tomorrow. Let's keep going. What if we say ich kaufe nicht dieses Motorrad heute? By putting nicht in front of dieses Motorrad, I'm stressing it. That's the thing that I'm negating. I'm not buying this motorcycle today, ... but I will buy that other one. Ich kaufe nicht dieses Motorrad heute, ... sondern das andere Motorrad da drüben. Mann, es sieht sehr schnell aus. Now, we run into some problems here in German because of word order requirements. We can't move the verb out of position 2. So how do we stress kaufen? In English, we can just overpronounce it, right? We can say, I'm not buying this motorcycle today, ... but I am going to rent it. How do we do that in German? Well, in German, you can use stress more or less the same way we do in English. I think it helps if you move the verb to the last position in the sentence. Whatever comes last in the sentence usually is the most important thing. So if we rearrange the sentence a little bit and stress or overstress the verb kaufen, I think we can achieve the same results in German as we did in English. So for example, ich werde dieses Motorrad heute nicht kaufen, ... sondern mieten. I'm not going to buy it today, but I am going to rent it. Okay, how do we stress the subject then? I think you can just get away with doing simple stress the same way we do in English. In English you'd say, I'm not going to buy this motorcycle today. Somebody else might, but I'm not going to. In German, ich kaufe dieses Motorrad heute nicht, ... but maybe some other guy will. So, thank you for sending in that request. I love doing viewer request episodes. I hope that this helps answer the question, or at least kind of shed some light on what should be a simple subject but isn't because of all the exceptions. Let's quickly review the two rules. Number one, by default, in simple declarative sentences, nicht wants to come at the end of the sentence when you negate. Okay, and yeah, there's a bunch of exceptions to that, as we've covered. Number two, if nicht is not in that default position, then it emphasizes or negates whatever comes directly after it. This can shift the meaning of the sentence and you end up saying something that you didn't mean to say. Fortunately, if I can put a silver lining on this cloud, I think most of the time it's going to be a fairly minor mistake, or maybe a slightly moderate mistake. You might say something and a German person might look at you and say, sondern, like they're waiting for you to finish a sentence because it sounds like you're not done speaking it because of the way you phrased it, and that's how you know, oh shoot, I put nicht in the wrong position, gotta try that again. Usually it's not a big deal. There may be an example here or there where you can drastically change the meaning of a sentence just by moving nicht. I think most of the time though, it's going to be fairly minor. So thank you for that request. I hope that helps answer your question. If you have ideas or requests, something you'd like to see covered in future episodes, you know what, I should probably stop saying that. I should probably stop saying that. It's mid-September and it's kind of chilly out here. I don't think we have too many more good writing days ahead of us. You know what, you could still send in requests. I might not get to it in what's left of this season, but I can add it to the idea queue for next season. I had 3 or 4 more episodes, either scripted or partially scripted for this season, but I honestly don't think I'm going to get to them. There's at least 1 more episode this season, and that's going to be the 2022 season wrap-up video. That's going to come later this month, I think. But we're into mid-September now, so snow could happen at any time. You know, it's one of the drawbacks of living in Canada. So it is what it is. We're kind of winding the season down a little bit, sadly, very, very sadly. But yeah, there's at least 1 more episode coming. So if you do have requests for future episodes, please either write them in the comments down below or use the anonymous email feedback link at the bottom of the website. I will make every reasonable effort to get to those requests. When I get to those requests, I can't really say. I'm kind of at the mercy of the weather, but I will do my best. That's it for today. We will see you next time on Lernen und Fahren.